Gearing up for greatness in the NFL over the long haul is like trying to navigate a maze blindfolded. It's a challenge only the bravest souls dare to take on. But for a select few like Tom Brady, Jerry Rice, and Ray Lewis, the gridiron is their kingdom and they reign supreme. They didn't just dominate the game, they rewrote the playbook on what it means to be a legend. Picture this: Brady dropping back in slow motion, Rice making defenders look like lost puppies, and Lewis delivering bone-crushing hits that even the turf felt. In the annals of NFL history, these titans are the standard bearers of sustained excellence. But even for them, there's the undeniable allure of that one unforgettable season, the kind that etches your name in the record books and leaves fans breathless. Having that lightning-in-a-bottle year might be just as difficult. There are plenty to choose from, but here are 10 who went from amazing to average or worse in a blink. The explanation of some disappearing acts can be one's regression to the mean, but many can certainly blame injuries. Greg Cook is a prime example of being unable to stay on the field and a classic case of what could have been. It was a terrific story waiting to be written. A University of Cincinnati product drafted 5th overall by the Bengals in 1969. He was named the starter in his rookie season by legendary head coach Paul Brown, and Cook immediately made him look like the genius he was. In Week 1, he threw 2 touchdowns in a victory over Miami. He followed that up with 327 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Chargers. In Week 3 versus Kansas City, Cook suffered what was eventually found to be a torn rotator cuff and a partially separated bicep. He missed 3 games, but still managed to lead the American Football League in yards gained per pass attempt, totaling 1,854 yards through the air and 11 passing touchdowns in winning the Rookie of the Year. But the injuries suffered in the Chiefs contest were too much to overcome. He would sit out the next 2 seasons, retired in 1972, and made a comeback attempt in 1973 that only amounted to a single game. Cook's story is instead a chapter in the Bengals' snake-bitten legacy. Yet, like many before him, he's not alone in facing the highs and lows of NFL stardom. Charles White did not begin his NFL career with the same flourish after becoming the latest in a long line of Heisman Trophy winning running backs to come out of the University of Southern California. Instead, he languished for 5 years in Cleveland, totaling less than 1,000 yards on the ground. By 1985, White was in Los Angeles, playing for the Rams and playing under his old USC coach John Robinson. In 1987, the midseason trade of starting running back Eric Dickerson meant an opportunity for White. He didn't miss. White led the NFL in carries, rushing yards, and rushing TDs, the rare running back triple crown. During a strike-shortened year, he made the Pro Bowl and was a first-team All-Pro. Most impressive was a 5-game stretch late in the schedule when he recorded 723 yards and scored 8 times. The next season, White was once again a backup. He started only 3 more games in his career and retired after the 1988 season. But that year wasn't without a breakout rusher. Everyone join in on the Icky Shuffle if you'd like. The let's call it a dance that symbolized every touchdown he scored came pretty frequently as the Cincinnati Bengals went on a joyride that eventually saw them reach Super Bowl 23. As a rookie, Icky cut the rug many times in '88, ending up with 15 touchdowns for the AFC champs. Woods became a regular part of the Cincinnati backfield in Week 4 against the Browns, gaining 62 yards and finding the end zone twice. He scored 8 times in 5 weeks, and the Icky Shuffle became a nationwide phenomenon. Over the final 7 regular season games, Woods nearly doubled his rushing yards from the year's first 9 weeks. He produced multi-touchdown efforts in victories over the Browns, Jets, Oilers, Bills, and Chargers. Woods finished the season with the league's best in yards per carry at 5.3. He still has the Bengals' franchise record for rushing scores. He didn't let up in the playoffs either. Woods ran for 126 yards and a TD in the divisional win over Seattle, then scored twice in the AFC title game victory versus the Bills. Woods was done in by an ACL injury in Week 2 of the following season and never fully recovered. Injuries are an unfortunate part of the game, and this next player is one who experienced his fair share of visits to the team doctor. 1989 was a year to believe in magic, specifically the Magic Man. Don Majkowski made victories for the Green Bay Packers appear out of nowhere. He rode the bench in '88 before starting 9 of the Pack's 13 games, but averaged just 163 passing yards per contest. In '89, the 25-year-old Majkowski led the NFL with 4,318 yards and was third with 27 touchdowns. He did throw 20 interceptions, but the rewards outweighed the risks. Green Bay had 10 victories, many in dramatic fashion. The Packers played 9 games decided by 3 or fewer points and won 5 of them. Mikowski engineered a controversial last-gasp victory over the Chicago Bears on November 5th, a one-point victory over the Minnesota Vikings on November 26th, and a one-point victory over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on December 3rd. All that magic wasn't enough, however, to conjure up a playoff berth. And the magic ran out for Mikowski soon after. Injuries played a part in his decline, and he started only 27 games from 1990 through 1996. When you think of running backs in the 1990s, you think of Barry. Well, not this Barry. Barry Foster outran Sanders and every other rusher not named Emmitt Smith in 1992. In his third pro season, he also wound up runner-up in the Associated Press's MVP voting to the Cowboys Hall of Famer. In his 2 pro seasons before '92, Foster served primarily as a backup and a special teamer, with 691 rushing yards and 2 TDs. The insertion of Bill Cowher as Steelers head coach coincided with Foster's emergence. He had nearly 300 yards over the first 2 games of 1992. During a stretch in which Pittsburgh won 7 of 8, Foster had 100 or more yards in each of those victories. He carried the ball a league-leading 390 times as the Steelers overachieved and won the AFC Central Division title. Foster gained a Steelers single-season record 1,690 yards on the ground, averaging 105.6 per game, and scored 11 touchdowns. Barry was on fire. But unfortunately, after 2 mediocre seasons and a trade to Carolina, Foster was out of the league and on the golf course by 1995. From Barry to Gary. The Denver Broncos' main man carrying the ball was a player worth saluting. Terrell Davis's brief but stellar career led Denver to back-to-back Super Bowls. When Davis went down and out of the lineup in Week 4 of the 1999 season, there was a void that needed to be filled. Olandis Gary, a 4th-round pick from Georgia, went from Bulldog to Bronco and had a rookie season that made fans wonder if Davis had just switched numbers. He got the ball 37 times against the Packers in his second pro game and rushed for 124 yards. A week later, he had 129 scrimmage yards at New England. 2 weeks after that, he rushed for 108 and scored twice. Most impressive was a 2-week stretch late in the season, gaining 183 on the ground in a win against Seattle, only to torch the Lions on Christmas for 185. For his abbreviated season, Gary rushed for 1,159 yards with 7 touchdowns in 12 games. Gary was on fire. Unfortunately, any chance to see if he could build on that successful freshman campaign was derailed by a knee injury in 2000. He played just 3 unproductive seasons after that. So many athletes experience injuries, leaving us to wonder what might have been if fate had dealt them a different hand. Would Gary have traded his cleats for golf clubs, or perhaps snagged a few championship rings if he'd stayed healthy? It's a question that lingers in the air like a Hail Mary pass. And speaking of game changers with injury woes, our next player is a household name. You've probably heard of him once or twice. Tim Tebow's rise to NFL stardom was like finding a winning lottery ticket in your sock drawer. It seemed improbable, but boy did it make headlines. Thanks in part to Peyton Manning's golden arm and a sprinkle of divine intervention, Tebow Mania was born, and it was wilder than a rodeo on roller skates. In 2011, Tebow flipped the script on conventional quarterbacking with his Tebow time heroics, leaving defenses scratching their heads and fans clutching their rosaries. The Broncos season turned into a Hollywood blockbuster, complete with dramatic comebacks and plot twists that even Christopher Nolan would envy. His crowning achievement? A playoff game for the ages against the Steelers, where Tebow's arm turned into a magic wand, weaving spells and touchdowns like a quarterback possessed. But like a sandcastle at high tide, Tebow's NFL career couldn't withstand the relentless waves of doubt and scrutiny. His unconventional style left more questions than answers, and his time in the spotlight fizzled faster than a wet firecracker. Despite the rollercoaster ride, Tebow left an indelible mark on the NFL and its fans, proving that sometimes a little faith and a lot of grit can turn dreams into touchdowns. One-year wonders are a sight to be seen, and this next player is no exception. Do you remember Peyton Hillis on the front of Madden NFL 12? He earned cover athlete status thanks to a 2010 season that stunned the public and a year never to be seen again. Hillis was an afterthought in Denver, but with the Cleveland Browns, he exploded for 1,654 scrimmage yards, 11 rushing touchdowns, 61 receptions, and made his fantasy football owners very, very happy. He racked up the second highest yardage total in the league and the second most touchdowns that season. Injuries in the Browns' backfield opened up more chances for Hillis. He went for 144 yards on the ground in Week 3, and in Week 9 his 184 yards was the catalyst in Cleveland's upset win over the New England Patriots. Later in the year against Carolina, Hillis ran for over 130, had more than 60 receiving yards, and found the end zone 3 times. Unfortunately, as fast as Hillis arrived on the scene, he faded into obscurity. The Madden appearance feels like an aberration, and while the Madden curse can be validated in some cases, Hillis was more of a victim of being on the lousy Browns. He was dealt to Kansas City after that magical 2010 campaign and was ineffective for the next 4 years. He's now a top voice in college football. Back in 2011, he was arguably the best player in college football, and for a time, in 2012 specifically, he was the most spectacular player in professional football. Injuries are often the case for athletes' short life in the spotlight, and RG3 is one who might be at the top of the list. Washington jumped at the chance to acquire the dynamic Robert Griffin III. Striking a deal prior to draft day, it acquired the number 2 pick in the 2012 draft to increase its likelihood of selecting the reigning Heisman-winning quarterback from Baylor. RG3 proved it to be a wise decision right away. He threw for 3,200 yards and 20 touchdowns. He ran for 815 yards. He led Washington to the playoffs as a rookie. Griffin was the NFC Offensive Player of the Week in a 19 for 26, 320-yard passing performance against New Orleans. He earned the same honor in the wake of a November 14th victory over Philadelphia. It wasn't just the stats, it was the way he did it, through leadership and dynamic playmaking that opened up the offense. But that style of play put him at an injury risk. It came to a head late in the season. Against Baltimore, he suffered an LCL sprain that would hover over the club for the remainder of the year. The wild-card matchup with Seattle at FedEx Field was the beginning of the end. Griffin re-injured his knee, which required off-season surgery. He returned for the 2013 season opener, but in terms of sensational seasons, RG3 was more like RG1. So many players come into the spotlight, but this next one is truly a head-scratcher. How in the world do you go from elite tight end to out of the NFL in less than 2 years? Ask Gary Barnidge. From 2008 through 2012 in Carolina, it didn't look like Barnidge would be long for this league. In 2 of those seasons, he didn't catch a single pass. In another, he was injured and never saw the field. In 2012, he had just 78 yards for the entire year. Barnidge went to Cleveland, but for 2 years was nothing more than a lightly used player. Then came 2015, when he went from bench warmer to doing things in a Browns uniform only Hall of Famer Ozzie Newsome accomplished. He finished with 79 receptions for 1,043 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns, astonishing numbers for someone who had 44 receptions, 603 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns in his previous 7 seasons combined. Like what? Those 9 touchdowns tied Newsome's franchise single-season mark. Barnidge was rewarded with a Pro Bowl selection and a 3-year contract extension worth around $12 million. In June 2016, he underwent sports hernia surgery, and that upcoming season regressed to 55 catches for 612 yards and a pair of TDs. He was out of the NFL a year later. You can say it was due to injuries, bad luck, unfortunate timing, or that it just wasn't meant to be. The biggest one-year wonders shine like shooting stars in the night sky. Brief, brilliant, and unforgettable. From unlikely heroes to unexpected triumphs, these players carve their names in football lore with a single season or 2 of brilliance. While their time in the spotlight may have been fleeting, their impact resonates far beyond the gridiron, reminding us that in the unpredictable world of professional football, greatness can emerge from the unlikeliest of places, if only for a moment.